Hi, this is Lori Marks. This is the March 2021 WPE workshop, part 2. In part 2, I'm going to discuss the reading set. So here's the plan. First, we're going to talk about what these readings are and the purpose and conclusions from each of the 4 selections in the reading set. I'm going to give some suggestions about how this particular selection might be relevant to your project. And then finally, I'll do a more in-depth review of the Bach and Yi essay. So here are the 4 readings in the reading set. The first one is by James Truslow Adams. It was published in 1931. And it's a selection from his book titled The Epic of America. Adams was a businessman who became a historian. His work popularized the historical research of the time. He won the Pulitzer Prize, and many of his books were bestsellers. The Epic of America reviews how the ordinary American has matured over time in outlook, character, and opinion. The second piece in the reading set is by Yuna Bach and Yujai Lee. The title is When the American Dream Fails, the Effect of Perceived Economic Inequality on Present-Orientated Behavior. This piece was published in an academic journal. And one thing about academic journals is that they literally tell you in their title what they're about. This title is Psychology and Marketing. And it is a journal that presents original research and review that deals with the application of psychological theories and techniques to marketing. The third selection is by Eileen Diaz-McConnell and Enrico Marcelli. The title is Buying into the American Dream, Mexican Immigrants, Legal Status, and Homeownership in Los Angeles County. So just as with the title of academic journals, the titles of essays tend to tell you exactly what their subject is. This article was published in Social Science Quarterly. This particular academic journal publishes current research on a broad range of topics, including political science, sociology, economics, history, social work, geography, international studies, and women's studies. Finally, we have an article from the Miami Herald by Rebecca San Juan and Yadira Lopez. The Miami Journal is a daily newspaper that covers South Florida. So we gave you this first piece by James Truslow Adams, which is a very brief, less than 1-page selection from his book. We chose this selection because while we often talk about the American dream in our society, it is rarely defined. And so we also assume we know what we're talking about, but we don't. This guy, James Truslow Adams, was the first person to use the term American dream and the first one to explain what it is. So I'm giving you this quotation, which I'm going to read out loud to you. The American dream is that dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for every man, with opportunity for each according to his ability or achievement. It is not a dream of motor cars and high wages merely, but a dream of social order in which each man and each woman shall be able to attain to the fullest stature of which they are innately capable, and be recognized by others for what they are, regardless of the fortuitous circumstances of birth or position. So the relevance to your project is this. I assume that nearly every essay submitted will include this quotation because it offers an easy way to establish your focus on the question. But I also suggest that you can use Adam's words to help you to get into questions that may interest you. Twice in this one page, Adams mentions that the American dream isn't only an economic one, and that it also is a dream that every American can fulfill their promise. I don't have to tell you that fulfilling one's promise is at least partly a matter of economics. Students at UMass Boston are engaged in a great effort to achieve and pay for their education, which is another commonly recognized aspect of the American dream. In other words, we believe that in order to achieve one's fullest potential, it's necessary for one to have an education. So here are some questions that could be generated by this passage, which in turn would give you something more to say. Is it possible for everyone to achieve a better life? If not, why not? Do we have a social order in which everyone can do what they're capable of, regardless of poverty, race, ethnicity, or immigration status? Out of the 4 selections in the reading set, this one by Buck and Yee is the most difficult to read, and it's the most challenging to relate to the topic. Therefore, I've taken a quick look at all of the essays in the reading set. After I've done that, I'm going to return to this one and do a detailed review of it. Right now, I just want to point out that the thesis of the essay is clearly stated on page 5. This is the first sentence of the last paragraph on that page. Taken out of context, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but I'll go back to this sentence and explain it to you later. So their thesis is this. We argue that perceived economic inequality can induce present-oriented decision-making. People are prone to ignore the future and to restrain their time perspective to the present or past when facing poverty, social exclusion, or socioeconomic insecurity. This essay is relevant to your project in this way. The other 2 essays in the reading set examine the home owning experiences of Mexican immigrants in Los Angeles and Black people in South Florida. People in these demographics are objectively, mathematically less likely than non-Hispanic white people to own homes, and the barriers they face to home ownership are substantial. However, an additional barrier that confronts them, which doesn't seem fair, may be a psychological effect that causes them to engage in something called present-oriented decision-making. This kind of decision-making might actually be contributing to their low rate of home ownership. The next essay in the reading set is by Arlene Diaz-McConnell and Enrico Marcelli, and it's focused on Mexican immigrants, their legal status, and their home ownership in Los Angeles County. So it's very specific to a particular group and area. I think their thesis is on page 13. This is actually near the end of their essay rather than at the beginning, but it is there. And I think this is it, where they say, legal status does not keep undocumented Mexican immigrants in Los Angeles from buying into the American dream of home ownership. So how is this essay relevant to your project? First, remember that the purpose of this essay, the one by Diaz-McConnell and Marcelli, and your purpose in your essay are different from each other. You need to address a question about how income inequality and racial and ethnic identity might be a barrier to home ownership. These authors demonstrated that being undocumented is not a factor in Los Angeles County, which is a conclusion that surprised even them. In fact, the authors are claiming that regardless of their citizenship status, Mexican American people and undocumented Mexican immigrants are far less likely to be homeowners than non-Hispanic white people in Los Angeles, which has some of the highest home prices in the country. These authors' discussion can give you facts and ways of thinking about this question. In particular, look at pages 10 to 11, which suggest 3 ways to think about this problem. Give me just a second. I'm going to switch the view so you can see the reading set. Okay, this is page 10 to 11. So in the middle of this page, the authors have a subheading, Theories of Home Ownership. And they really are giving a brief review of different ways of approaching this question. So they say the options are economic, life cycle, life course, and assimilation, social capital. So first, the economics. From this approach, they would say purchasing a home is a significant investment, and housing research consistently demonstrates that those with lower incomes are much less likely to be homeowners than their higher earning peers. So earning a low income inhibits the ability to save for a down payment, afford principal and interest payments, homeowners insurance, real estate taxes, and other costs of home ownership. So a lot of you probably don't own a home yet, but it takes a lot of money, and it's not just because houses are expensive, but because there are ongoing rather large expenses associated with the home. You have to maintain the home, you have to pay your mortgage and your interest payments, you have to carry insurance, you have to carry real estate taxes, and everything else from buying trash cans to putting on a new roof every 10 years. Houses are not cheap. So for people who have a low income, that's an important factor in their ability to purchase a house. It's kind of intuitive. The next one they say has to do with life cycle. I don't have much to say about this. Basically, they're just saying that the influence of the home purchase decision depends upon what stage of a life cycle a person is in. In particular, if you get married or have children, you're more likely to purchase a house at around that time. Again, this is pretty intuitive. On the other hand, as you age and have fewer people living in your house, you might sell your house and move back into an apartment. Okay, let's go on to the next one. This is a big one here. Assimilation and social capital. So first, it's important that you understand what social capital is. They say right here, researchers rarely invoke social capital theory per se. But if you look at the bottom of the page, we've given you a definition of social capital theory. It's footnote number 9. By the way, we've given you footnotes because we think that we're giving you information that you can use. So don't just ignore the footnotes. They actually are there to help you. Social capital theory contends that social relationships are resources that can lead to the development and accumulation of human capital. For example, a stable family environment can support educational attainment and support the development of highly valued and rewarded skills and credentials. I grew up in a middle-class home with 2 college-educated parents, and I'm quite sure that these demographic facts had a positive impact upon my own ability to achieve my goals. I'm also pretty sure, in fact, I'm quite confident that my ability to purchase a home was in part because I inherited a large amount of money from my parents and was able to use that money to purchase the home. So here is a sentence in this paragraph that explains this idea. It says, social links between individuals lead to the sharing of information and provide a sense of connectedness that can be mobilized to address problems. This is relevant to the conclusion that these authors reached, which is that because of the large number of Mexican American people living in Los Angeles County, there are many social institutions that make it easier for them to become homeowners. And I'm sure that there are other factors that are supporting them in becoming homeowners as well. For instance, just the fact that they're likely to know other Mexican American immigrants living in Los Angeles County who do own homes, which will help them to imagine that it's possible for them. So this is the relevance of the idea of social capital. The next paragraph on that page, I think we're on page 11 now, relates to assimilation. So the process of assimilation really is just the process by which people's state of mind and knowledge transitions from belonging to one country to belonging to another country. So aspects of assimilation, they say, are obtaining more education, getting a better job and pay, and acquiring social capital, that these are all factors in a person's assimilation. In addition to this, people who are assimilating take on what they call the sentiments and attitudes of US society, which includes the American dream of owning a home. Another way that we can think about a person's, what they call a relative adjustment to the United States, is legal status. There is a positive connection for Latino elements of being a naturalized citizen, housing tenure, and home equity. These 3 characteristics are true for this particular group. In other words, the more likely they are to be a naturalized citizen, the more likely they are to have housing tenure and home equity. So those three ideas, just a second, I'm going to stop showing this screen and switch back to my PowerPoint screen. So these approaches to an analysis that have been given to you by Diaz, McConnell, and Marcelli are approaches that you might want to apply, or frameworks you might want to apply to your own project. And again, as with the previous two essays, a step towards achieving this would be to turn them into questions. So you might take one of the ideas, say, about assimilation, and ask if there might be an assimilation role for the people who are trying to purchase homes and are running into some kind of obstacle in doing so. Okay, so finally, the last essay in the reading set is from this daily newspaper, and it's by two reporters, Rebecca San Juan and Yadira Lopez. Their topic, subject, is home ownership among Blacks and Latinos slides in South Florida. So they're reporting on a decrease in home ownership among these two groups in their particular area. Since this is a report and not an essay, it's quite easy to read. The reporters mention relatively recent economic catastrophes, such as the Great Recession of 2007 to 2009, as well as our current pandemic. And both of these catastrophes had a disproportionate impact on low-income people and people of color. This article gives a review of the current reduction in home ownership among Latinos and Blacks, and considers some of the contributing factors, which include low income and high cost of homes. Now, one of the requirements for this WPE essay is that you're not allowed to use examples from your own experience, but there are some excellent examples in this article that you can use, along with data and analysis. So I think you'll find this essay to be the most readable out of everything in the reading set. And if you find that you're getting too bogged down in reading the more difficult essays, you actually are free to read this one first. And it might help you to kind of start feeling like you have at least your feet wet in the subject. Now we're going to go back to talk about Buck and Yee. So I told you earlier that this is their thesis. I'm going to read it to you again because then I'm going to discuss it in a little bit more detail. We argue that perceived economic inequality can induce present-oriented decision-making. People are prone to ignore the future and to restrain their time perspective to the present or past when facing poverty, social exclusion, or socioeconomic insecurity. So there's two key terms or phrases from this first sentence. First, they're talking about perceived economic inequality. That is, if a person thinks that they're in a state of being unequal economically, then that will have an effect on them, even if objectively speaking, they are not in fact experiencing economic inequality. So what they believe or their attitude, they say, is what matters. So I've given you this quotation from page 6, which explains this particular idea a little bit. Attitude toward inequality can be determined more by belief than by the actual level of economic inequality. So this is why they're talking about perceived economic inequality rather than just objective economic inequality. The second phrase is present oriented. And this I'm also have an explanation for on page 6. Poverty is highly related to a strong present time orientation with little ability to defer gratification and plan for the future. So people who are in poverty tend to have what these authors describe as a myopic focus. So it's very nearsighted. They think about the close term things. What problem do I need to solve right now? And if you think about a time in your life that you've been impoverished, and yes, I do have these times for myself, you know, the things that matter are whether you have food in the cupboard, whether you're going to have a roof over your head for another month, how are you going to make your ragged shirt last another month, and whether you can postpone getting new shoes, whether, you know, the hole that you've worn through the bottom of your shoe can be patched up somehow. This is very present oriented thinking. It's all about what's happening right now. The ability to defer gratification is the ability to postpone something that you want. In my case, it might just be a cup of coffee, maybe a latte, which, you know, if I go to Starbucks is going to cost me some bucks. If I've made a determination that I'm saving for the future, I might be able to not buy that latte and throw that $6 into my saving for the future plan. For instance, if I'm saving for a down payment on a house. But if I don't believe that it's actually possible for me to purchase a house, even if I deprive myself of all these things, if I believe that the inequality in my life is so extreme that it's going to make it essentially impossible for me to purchase a house, then I'm going to buy that latte, right? There's no reason for me to defer gratification, or for that matter, to plan for the future. If I don't believe that I can achieve my goals for the future, I'm not going to plan for them. So this is their thesis, and I hope that this explanation helps you to follow it a little bit better. Now I'm going to stop sharing the PowerPoint and go back to the reading set. Excuse me a second while I go up to the Bach and Yi or essay. So now we're on page 5. This essay covers 4 pages from page 5 to page 8. And right here in the second paragraph, they make their argument sorry for wasting your time here. They make their argument. First, although research has revealed the adverse effect of income inequality at the societal, interpersonal, and individual levels, relatively few studies examined how inequality affects individuals' behavior, especially in their decision making. So here, these authors are just saying that there's a gap in the research, in the scholarly research, and that their goal is to fill that gap. This kind of move is often made by academic essayists because their primary audience is their fellow academics who are also constantly trying to improve what we understand about their particular subject. So they've identified this hole in the research, and they're going to fill the hole by conducting more research. So their study, they say, focuses on the effect of inequality on individuals, particularly on their temporal preference in decision making, and seeks to provide an explanation of this effect. Temporal preference in decision making. Basically, this is what I've already said to you. A temporal preference might be being present oriented. So temporal refers to time. If you're present or future oriented. And now here's their thesis at the top of the next paragraph. We argue that perceived economic inequality can induce present-oriented decision-making. And here's a follow-up explanation of why this might be the case. Disadvantaged people engage in present-oriented myopic decision-making rather than planning for the future or long-term goal-oriented decision-making. They tend to have a higher discount rate and make short-sighted decisions that focus on immediate gains rather than the long-term perspective. Thus, people are prone to ignore the future and to restrain their time perspective to the present or past when facing poverty, social exclusion, or socioeconomic insecurity. So one word, phrase I just read, discount rate, is another one that's defined in the footnotes. And we found this online for you. In economics, the discount rate is the rate at which society as a whole is willing to trade off present for future benefits. So when they say that people who are disadvantaged tend to have a high discount rate, what they mean is that they tend to make these short-sighted decisions that focus on immediate gains. If they had a low discount rate, then presumably that would mean that they're taking a more long-term perspective. And then they state this position: how the economic environment is perceived can determine an individual's behavior given a long-term or short-term perspective. So this is where they're emphasizing perception over objective reality, because what people believe is what affects their behavior and not what is objectively true. An example I think of is how incredibly bad you might get at one of your close friends because you suspected that they were in process of trying to steal the heart of your boyfriend or girlfriend. They may not actually be trying to do that, but you might perceive that they're trying to do that. And you base your behavior on what you perceive and not on what's actually true. People who perceive themselves to be economically disadvantaged are going to behave as though it's true. And I just want to emphasize here that if you perceive there to be economic disadvantage, that doesn't mean it's your fault. That economic disadvantage may in fact be objectively true. And if it's not objectively true, the fact that you perceive it is probably coming from your immediate social environment. So if it's generally believed that the economic environment is hostile to people of your particular group, then you're going to believe it to be true. Also, this psychological effect that it has upon an individual, which causes us to behave a particular way, is something that's true for everyone. So if anybody is in this position where they believe that somehow, the chances of success are denied them, they are going to start behaving with a short-term perspective. And it doesn't matter what your economic group or racial group or ethnic group is, it's going to have this effect, and that's because it's a human effect. And here's their explanation of why this happens. The intertemporal choice, and we've given an explanation here, this is a choice between present benefits and future benefits. So this intertemporal choice relies on trusting that delayed payoff will occur, and setting long-term goals is highly related to societal justice. So if you believe you live in an unjust society, you may not believe that you're going to get a delayed payoff. You may believe that if you deprive yourself of everything for 10 years to save up money for a down payment, you may believe that that chance is going to be snatched away from you because we live in an unjust society. And so that's the logic that lies behind this psychological position. It's a good logic. It actually does make sense that if you think you're unlikely to succeed, then you're not going to deprive yourself. So we're going to page 6 now. And here's the research studies and the research that they did. They've found in their review of the material, they found that people behave in a more present-oriented behavior when they perceive economic inequality. And they say this phenomenon can be explained by lowered perceived economic mobility, which they abbreviate as PEM, which results from perceived inequality. So if you perceive that you're in an unequal situation, then you're also going to perceive that you have a lower chance of economic mobility. So now they explain, I think I neglected something here. So related to this topic, the loss of future orientation might cause a disadvantaged person or a group to be less likely to buy a home. So think about that. If a home is very expensive, as I assure you it is, so that if you have a lower income in your family, you're saving a higher proportion of that low income in order to save up for a down payment. Then to be able to do that requires you to be future oriented. But if you're in a situation that you perceive economic inequality, you're not going to be future oriented. You're going to be present oriented. And so this is why people who believe or perceive economic inequality are less likely to be saving money for a down payment. So where does this perception come from? And they explain this psychologically. People mostly act in reaction to and in the presence of other people, political, economic, and cultural conditions. What they're saying here is that we are not actually independent. We may like to think that we are, but we actually are heavily influenced by the factors that surround us. If we're surrounded by other people with a certain attitude, we're more likely to have that attitude. If the political environment is hostile towards people who belong to the group that I belong to, that's going to have an effect upon my attitude towards that social attitude. And this is also true for the economic conditions. If I live in a neighborhood that's economically depressed, I'm not going to perceive that I have a very good chance of economic mobility. So the conditions I live in have an effect upon what I think. A little bit further down, we have another highlighted sentence where I said, relatedly, economic inequality is also associated with various social outcomes, such as impeding economic and political development, breaking social cohesion, increasing antisocial behavior, and worsening personal well-being. So these are social incomes that also result from economic inequality. These characteristics that are a result of the inequality, but that typically the people who aren't affected by these will blame the victims for it. So if I have a worsening personal well-being, my friends might wag their fingers at me and say, well, you need to fix yourself. There's something wrong with you. When in fact, my worsening personal well-being may be coming from the fact that I'm in a state of believing that I'm experiencing economic inequality. So they're blaming me. They're not blaming the real cause of the problem, which is economic inequality. Now, at the very bottom of the page, they talk about the connection between present orientation and intertemporal choice. Intertemporal choice, I'm reminding you again, is the choice between being present oriented or being future oriented. They say, we posit that, that's like a fancy way of saying propose. We propose that when an individual perceives economic inequality, they may be more present-oriented. Present-oriented people tend to enjoy the moment, undistracted by future anxieties, and have little ability to delay gratification and build long-term goals. They are more likely to engage in risk-taking behaviors. On the other hand, a future time perspective has been associated with increased delay of gratification rather than to desire immediate satisfaction. So I've suggested to you already what the role of delayed gratification on home purchase is. A person of low income might require years of self-deprivation and hard work to save money for a down payment. And to persist in trying to achieve that goal requires an enormous strength of will, because every day you have to decide again that you're not going to get that latte or whatever, that you're going to take that $6 and save it for your down payment. And so you have to have not just a belief that you're going to succeed, but you're also going to have a real persistent belief, one that enables you to resist the constant temptation to indulge yourself. So in the next section, they're explaining the relationship between economic inequality and long-term goals. And they summarize this passage from another person's research. The other person's last name is Lerner. They published in 1980. And I think that this is the argument that underlies the research that Bach and Yi completed. Also, just incidentally, this is a good example of how to summarize. This is a 3 or 4 sentence summary of what must have been a very complex argument. But they explain the essential parts of the argument without going into a lot of detail. So here we go. Lerner, 1980, states that people's motivation to pursue long-term goals depends on their belief in social justice. In particular, individuals make personal contracts with the society by agreeing on rewards in the distant future that require current effort and investments. Achieving a long-term goal generally requires steady commitment, even if there is no immediate result. Making effort for the future therefore needs conviction that sacrificing the present will be rewarded in the future. And a just environment plays a functional role in confirming this belief, that is, the belief that the sacrifice will be rewarded. Thus, belief in a just society is necessary to build long-term goals. This is the logical argument here. And I do suggest that you spend a little bit of time just studying it and seeing how each conclusion leads to the next one and how it works logically. Because if you can understand how they're summarizing, Lerner's argument, I think that in turn is going to help you to understand their argument much more easily. Now we're getting to page 8 here. And here they go from talking about people who do have a future-oriented time horizon to talking about those that are stuck in the present-oriented time horizon. Here, they're making a move that's kind of a puzzle, because what they're talking about, as you can see on the previous page, is people in developed countries. And they're saying people in developed countries tend to be more future-oriented and behave in a more long-term perspective manner. So a developed country like the United States, as a group, we tend to be more future-oriented. And so here they're talking about people in developing countries, countries that are not yet at a state of functioning at a full economic level. People in those countries are past or present oriented and have a short-term perspective. So they're talking about people in countries, but they're making this switch and saying, okay, I can learn from this research and say that unpredictable and unstable circumstances make it impossible for individuals to adopt a future-oriented time horizon. This is their extension of the results of these people's research. Jaeger and Kanungo, which they're discussing on the bottom of page 7. So they're extending their research and making this conclusion. Unpredictable and unstable circumstances make it impossible for individuals to adopt a future-oriented time horizon. So then they talk about perceived economic mobility. And this is where they raise kind of a societal attitude. We do have this assumption in this country that people who work hard will get ahead. And this is economic mobility. The fact is that there are lots of very hardworking people in this country who do not get ahead, and that you can prove objectively that this belief is untrue. However, it's one of our societal assumptions. They say this: given that people equate mobility with meritocracy, people with high perceived economic mobility believe that people succeed when they put in a lot of effort, and people get rewarded for their effort. So people, that is people in this country, equate mobility with meritocracy. Meritocracy is the belief that people succeed because of their merits. For instance, their character, their personal qualities, their intelligence, and their skill. These are all individual persons' characteristics. This belief in meritocracy ignores the social factors that might prevent a very able person from expressing or achieving what they can, and might even prevent a person from developing these merits in the first place. So people with a high PEM, that is, they have a high perceived economic mobility, someone who does believe that people succeed, are the people who believe that people who do not succeed are not working hard enough. Or what they don't perceive is that there may be some obstacle in the way of people achieving that goal. Then they say, in an ideal society, people believe that every individual has an opportunity to be successful based on their internal factors, that is, what's inside of them, their ability, their hard work, and their high integrity. On the other hand, people who perceive inequality reject that belief. They do not believe that upward mobility is due to effort. And instead, they believe it's due to structural benefits that are given to some people and not to others. The authors also talk about how people can persist in achieving a difficult task, that they need to believe in the future. They need to believe that the future is on their side and that they're going to achieve something. And then at the bottom of page 8, we have this entire paragraph, which is really summarizing Buck and Yee's entire argument. So they've got their whole argument crammed into, it looks like 3 sentences. I'm going to read those to you. From this perspective, People become more future-oriented. For example, delayed gratification, less risky behaviors, and more distant goals, when they believe their effort will be justly rewarded. In other words, the more individuals believe that today's efforts can bring success in the future, the more they are motivated to build long-term plans to achieve greater rewards in the future. However, under the high inequality condition, as people believe that distant and challenging goals are difficult to achieve, they may perceive it difficult to climb a highly unequal economic ladder. And today's effort is not related to future success, resulted in losing motivation to delay present pleasure. We therefore hypothesize that this discouraged belief will induce present-oriented behavior. So that paragraph is really saying again what I've always said to you, what I've already said to you about what their argument is. If you think that you're going to have trouble with the Buck and Yee essay, you might want to look at that paragraph first. Read the last paragraph in their essay, and that's going to give you a framework from which to understand their argument. Oh, sorry, I accidentally ended my presentation prematurely. All right, so I'm done, except that I want to tell you about these resources. These are things that you can do that we can demonstrate will help you to pass. So if you want to be future oriented and you want to achieve your goal of getting your degree, do these things. These things will help you to pass. First, we may have tutoring appointments available. We're sending you a weekly update message on Fridays, and in that message, there is a link you can click on to schedule tutoring appointments. If there are no more tutoring appointments available, you can keep checking back to see if any have become available, because your fellow students sometimes decide to cancel their appointments. If that happens, you can nab that appointment. A second thing you can do that will help you to pass is participate in the writing lab on Tuesday, March 16th. You can work on your paper that day and drop in for advice from a tutor. So if at any point you get stuck, you want someone to read a paragraph you've just written, or you need reassurance that you're heading in the right direction, our tutors will be standing by and you can drop in and get advice from them. And again, you'll get details on that from the weekly update message. Finally, we offer draft reviews. Students have told us repeatedly that this is one of the most useful things that we do to help them. With a draft review, you send us a draft of your challenge essay, and a member of the staff will go over it in relationship to the grading standards and will advise you about which of those grading standards you still are not achieving. So you can use that advice as a way to focus your revision of the paper to try to make sure that it does in fact do those things, therefore making you more likely to pass. The details about this will be in the weekly update. What you do is you actually schedule an appointment for you to get this draft review, but you don't actually have to show up for anything. You're just scheduling a half hour of a tutor's time so that they'll have that time to review your paper. And then you need to send us your paper by email, and the tutor will review your paper and will send you back the comments by email. Finally, If you have questions or you run into some kind of an obstacle or you need any kind of assistance in achieving your goal, contact us by email. It's the best way to talk to us. We're very good with email. We tend to reply very quickly. Our email address, which is the address that you've been getting these updates from, is writing.proficiency@umb.edu. Thank you for listening. I realize that you all have had too many Zoom meetings and are probably really sick of them, just as I am. But nevertheless, I hope that this has been helpful for you.